Hello world, you are listening to Strategikon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs.
It is Tuesday, March 17, 2015, Episode 8. I'm your host, John Bruni, and with me in the studio today is co-host and Sage International Associate David Olney from the University of Adelaide and Strategikon producer Alicia Moraw. Good evening to you both.
Good evening, John.
Never has there been a more politically vexing defence acquisition program as that of the Collins-class submarine. Born out of the desire to replace the Royal Australian Navy's ageing British-bought Oberon-class boats in service for just over 30 years, the decision was made to build submarines in Australia rather than purchase them off the shelf from a foreign supplier. Lobbying efforts by the South Australian government saw the Collins assembly plant located at Osborne, which soon became one of Australia's premier shipbuilding as well as the country's only submarine building facility. But dogged with developmental problems of a first-of-class build, the Collins ran foul of the media that was quick to dub the Collins boats dud subs. It is an unfortunate and misleading tag which seems to have stuck in the public imagination. Tonight, in the lead-up to the Sub-Summit, March 25 and 26 at the Adelaide Convention Centre, we are happy to have in the studio former Managing Director and Chief Executive of the Australian Submarine Corporation, or ASC, Mr. Steve Ludlam. Steve will help clear up some of this negative mythology as well as give a clear account of a program that was gravely misunderstood thanks to the misfortune of bad press. Thanks for coming in this evening, Steve.
Thanks, John.
Steve, what do you reflect upon in your 5 years as head of the ASC?
Well, I reflect upon the rapid progress that ASC have made in the maintenance of the Collins-class submarine and the start-up, really, of modern-day warship building here in South Australia through a new yard, and particularly the recruitment of well over 1,000 production workers from pretty much a zero start. A lot of them were, trained at levels that were acceptable, but in the complex world of warships, we needed to add additional training in, and that was all done by ASC and with the local TAFE. So a great reflection on the people that I work with, some of the best people I've ever worked with around the world, and on the progressive times and the change that ASC went through and the major transformation to make it now a business that really is getting towards the world-class end of shipbuilding and ship maintenance.
So what would you describe as the most significant challenges you faced?
I think the biggest thing was the confidence of the people when I arrived. The confidence was at such a low level that we needed to, think of ways to improve that, and we were pretty fortunate. It sounds really strange to have a significant problem on Collins, and one that the engineers could bend their minds to with the leadership that was offered by me. I'm an engineer, and solve it quicker than we'd solved problems like that before. And once you start to solve problems and people start to say, well, that was pretty good, confidence builds, and then ideas come through, innovations come forward, and the whole process really can't stop then. The momentum's built to such a level that, every day ASC were doing newer and better things and taking different approaches to the maintenance of Collins. And likewise in the shipyard, every day the teams were thinking of different ways of putting the ship together and overcoming the challenges that were presented by that contract in itself, building those 3 air warfare destroyers.
David, would you like to ask a question?
Absolutely. How do you think, Steve, that you helped bring about the can-do culture? Because it seems to me that what changed most, talking to ASC people over the years, was a can-do attitude developed, and that it wasn't there originally, as you said. And culture change is fascinating because you can't ever really quantify it, and yet it's tangible.
It is tangible. First of all, I'd say that I had over 30 years' worth of experience in submarines, so immediately people could associate with me and I could associate with them in the submarines world. A second thing was to start to give that confidence and say, yeah, we can try that. It's possible to do that. I've seen this work before. Let's give it a go. And then with the confidence that we're building, to start to put a vision around what was necessary. And the vision that I gave to ASC was to be the leading shipyard in Australia. The codicil to that was that ASC should be competitive on an international playing field, and that meant that all the innovation that could come from the teams was going to be listened to. So, that was a large part of it, listening to them, getting them in small groups, asking what they really needed, what they would benefit from, and just providing, to the things that they were looking for, as simple as tools that they didn't have.
So really making sure that people could get on with their job, feeling that they were being listened to, and the expert was the person actually confronting the problem, not some distant person who would find out about it a week later.
That's absolutely right, yeah. It's been right front and centre into the business and providing what people were asking for. Of course, if some of the things were a little bit outrageous, then the experience was there to say, look, I'm not sure that we really need that. There's probably a different way of doing it. Let's think about that.
So really the best of both worlds, the best of all your experience and a group of people willing to learn.
Oh, willing to learn, and a very, very capable group of people. As I just said earlier, some of the best people I'd ever worked with. My previous experience was with one of the best engineering companies in the world, with Rolls-Royce. And I like to think the best engineering company in the world. But yeah, I worked at ASC with people who were as good and in some cases better than people I'd ever worked with. So,
do you get the impression that after changing the culture so much and getting such a level of effectiveness and adaptability, that part of the problem for ASC now is it exists in a political and corporate environment where ASC is now far more nimble than the people around it, and the people around it really don't appreciate what it does and how it does it? Is it misunderstood, do you think?
I think to an extent it is misunderstood. I think there's a sort of a schism. There's a better understanding of the performance on Collins class now. And because it's undeniable, the Collins class is out there. It's at the availability that the Royal Australian Navy needs, and it's undeniable. There are arguments as to whether it can be done more efficiently, and of course it probably can be done more efficiently. I'm a big believer that every day you can do something better, so it can be done more efficiently. But I think that's been put to bed, I would say. People have had to wind their necks in, really, because you can't deny what the evidence says.
Yeah,
the shipbuilding side is a little bit different. There's not a ship there ready yet. It's a start-up or a restart in many ways for Australia. There have been problems on the way. Very few problems at Osborne, I would say. It's been a high-quality job, but a slow job because I'd asked them to do the job well at high quality and not make mistakes. So it's been a little bit slow, but nonetheless high quality. And until a ship's ready and available, I think ASC will be fighting the battle of performance overall. But I've no doubt that it will be ready, it will be available. It will probably be well within the timescales of any first-class built anywhere around the world. And a lot of those who claim to be experts forget that point, that most first-class ships, wherever they're built around the world, extend way beyond the timescale that was originally thought for them and way beyond the budget. And I don't believe that's going to be the case for their warfare destroyers.
So really the fact you've used slow and steady wins the race means that over time the base is so solid for the next part of the build or the next build, and this is now part of the misunderstanding.
It is part of the misunderstanding. I mean, you set a vision of being the leading shipbuilder in Australia, and the only way to do that is to perform, and the best way to perform is to be slow and steady. One of my current jobs is as the chairman of the business that runs rugby union here. So I'm from a sports background as well, and so slow and steady, step by step is how you perform. You don't try and do too many brave things because usually they don't work, and but the slow and steady approach does, and that's what they've done out there, and that's what they're going to be successful with.
Steve, the Collins class program was sitting in a sea of politics and bureaucracy. So was there a noticeable disconnect between the politics and the bureaucracy surrounding Collins?
Yeah, I wasn't here at the time when all the politics on Collins was being played. I mean, I came at a beautiful point where there were very few Collins submarines available, if any, when I arrived in 2010, and now Navy's got what they want. The politics could be playing around, ASC, and it didn't really matter because the job was about fixing Collins and making it available. And so the bureaucracy, if we could call it that, was centred on could ASC and the Defence Material Organisation and Navy work together to actually produce an available submarine? And yes, they could, because we sat down and worked it through at the very senior levels. Back in 2010, a member from each organisation, myself from ASC, and worked out that we should work together. There was no option but to work together, and what that meant was we would try and get a little bit more money into the programme. We would do things differently, not try and do the same things. We would assemble the spares that were necessary to keep the boats running, and then we'd do all the innovative things to make changes on the boats. And that's what we did. So I very much separated the politics from the whole thing.
The fact it became such an effective practical process, is this part of potentially the problem in the future, is that it's been effective but quietly, and other than people in the know who were involved, the media just don't get the turnaround. So does ASC really need a very effective lobbying arm to explain to the world just how much was achieved? And is there any potential for ASC to have that ability to more effectively lobby?
In my time, I wouldn't use the word lobbying. It was a careful consideration of what we thought we should be doing as a vision and careful account of what we were actually achieving. And for whatever reason, we found it as ASC found it very difficult to change the perception of the public, and that was largely driven by the press and change the perception of the press. And I think until the benchmarking study on Collins that was done by an Englishman called John Coles, and his statement at the end of his benchmarking work, which had lasted around about 2 years, that it had been a remarkable turnaround. Very little credit was given to the performance. There were little bits. What was interesting, though, was over that period of time from 2010 through, was that there was less commentary about Collins than there had been previously. So I think we were quelling the commentary. But not changing the perception. If you see the difference,
yes, you got radio
in
silence, but you didn't get positive coverage.
But didn't get positive coverage. Yeah. Whereas when Coles came in and said, "What a remarkable turnaround that was," then we started to get a little bit of positive coverage, and that was a delight to see. And then ASC saw some negative press from the air warfare destroyer, which I think is unreasonable. There are a lot of lessons to learn from the air warfare destroyer. Largely they come out from the public report by the Australian National Audit Office. And I think the press have found it very difficult to pick out things from the NAO audit to sort of justify that a first-to-class in a start-up in a new yard and with yards that had previously built ships but had not done that for a long time. The press found it very difficult to comment on that, and we're taking, advice from others. And to a large extent, there was a serious trashing of the brand, which is it's a pretty unreasonable thing to do, particularly for the 2,000 people who are out there. Their lives need better than that, because they do a damn good job every day, and the trashing of the brand that many people got on the bandwagon of, I think, was very unfortunate and unreasonable and unfair. So we have an inexpert press trying to make comment on an industry that requires immense expertise. Yeah, that was that famous statement, back in the 60s, where they would say that, wouldn't they? And that was a comment that, you'd get back where you would say that, wouldn't you? Was it Mandy Rice, I think, in the Profumo affair said that?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, it's surprising hearing you say this, and, it's surprising watching the way that the media has kind of dealt with Collins, especially when Collins started showing really extraordinary form during naval exercises. What bedevils me is why the media stayed away from all these good news stories. I mean, that obviously would have been a great way in which PR, with regard to ASC, you guys could have come out and said, look, there we have it. We've got a boat that's doing spectacularly well. I mean, I know you can't comment on operational matters, and I know that there are limits to what one can report on these things, but in terms of public availability of certain aspects of Collins' characteristics, if it were to have fallen into the favour of ASC, surely that could have been used at some point.
It's difficult. They don't call it a silent service for nothing, you know. Submarines are there to be undetected. They're a deterrent, and if they're needed to be in the fight, they need to fight and win. And why give away what your abilities are? You know, that's not going to really work for you. Your question's more is, what could ASC have said? Well, ASC didn't have an awful lot to say before 2010, in my view. You know, its performance was determined by what it was able to do in itself and the low confidence it had, and its performance was determined by the money that it had available to it, which was not enough by any benchmark standard. And it didn't have a lot to say. Progressively, from 2010 onwards, ASC could start to make some comment about what it was doing, and I think you saw that. But it stemmed the tide of bad manners from the press. It didn't actually change the view, or very little changed the view. You saw a few positive comments, but hard to do that. And the best way of really saying that that's a submarine that's to be holden as one of the best in the world is to come from Navy. And as a silent service, why they're going to do that? You know, I wouldn't, and I don't blame them. You know, I think it's their privilege to be quiet, and they should be about it.
In your extensive experience working in the maritime industry, both in the UK and in Australia, can you tell us something about the differences between the organisational culture between the two countries?
I don't know that there's an enormous difference. I think the UK probably is just a little few years ahead in its approach to working together as the procurement agent within the defence establishment of the UK, as the Navy within the military establishment, and as the two or three organisations that largely deliver submarines, but only 2 or 3 years ahead, I would say, having gone through that programme, and you know, pretty much was at the heart of starting out the programme of working together. It took a long while to get it going, and what I can say is that when I came here in 2010 and we made the suggestion that the three parties should get together, that worked very quickly. Whether it worked because of prior experience or whether it worked because of the attitude, it's a can-do. We are going to do this. We need to. We're determined to do that. So I would say 2 or 3 years behind, but faster on the uptake. You know, a greater willingness to give it a go, you know. Yep. But not a lot of difference between the two, I wouldn't say.
And this is so often the comment that's made about Australia in relation to the UK and the US, that we're normally 3 to 5 years behind, but anything important we normally catch up very quickly. So it's always going to be an irony that no matter how well we do something, we're going to start a little behind and then catch up, but by that point, in a sense, that window of parity of perception has already been lost.
Yeah, well, I think that's a confidence issue in it as well, isn't it? You know, with the state that ASC's in now, and it's highly capable, its innovations, it's just doing naturally. And one of the things that was put in during 2014, during my tenure, was a thing called the Maintenance Support Tower. It was a major investment for ASC, and it's reduced the overhaul time. I'll call it an overhaul. Collins reduced it by a considerable amount. Perhaps I shouldn't give the numbers. And people around the world have gone, wow, what a facility that is. And it's not. It's not that smart.
So is this something that
But the idea is...
Yeah. Is this something just a group of people at ASC thought up and
Absolutely, yeah. It was a more complicated discussion than that. I mean, it started with how many people have we got? Can we flex the people upwards to be able to do these number of refits? Should we do that? We need to take cost out, so we reduce the time of the refit. How the heck are we going to do that? Look, we need a facility in which people live pretty much all the time, that they're on shift. And they don't have to move around very much, and all the tools and all the materials are on that facility. And an ASC built that, and, I put the first submarine into that just before I left, and what a wonderful facility that was. So that's... just having the confidence and the courage to get on with it. And I think we're pretty good on that. You know, I have no doubt about that.
And another case of it's Australia, we don't really have enough people, and the cost of people is expensive. So you've got to come up with creative solutions to use your people more effectively in the limited time available.
And we're good at that, and we do need the leaders that can actually say, yes, we are going to do that, and lead lead the naval industry through that set of issues and come out the other side very successfully.
Does it appear that some of these advances that you were part of, are they going to stick and be used across Australia? Are they going to be used in other bits of defence industry? Can ASC share some of this stuff with other organisations in the long run to sort of try and push Australian industry?
I think it's entirely possible for ASC to do that. As an example, on the Air Warfare Destroyer programme, the work that ASC did to improve its processes, get its management team organised, manage the people within the production environment was a real lesson learned, and that was done very carefully and I think done very successfully. In New South Wales, one of the business that we were working with in New South Wales had some problems, so I said, well, with your agreement, business in New South Wales, we'll send a team in there and we'll give you some advice on how to do that. We'll take over some of the principal roles that you were doing, but only with your agreement. Unfortunately, they agreed, and the team went in there and showed this other company some good ideas. And I'm not quite sure what's happening now, but I'm sure that ASC will have backed away from that a little bit, and the other team will have got on with what they were doing. They'll have more confidence, and they'll be actually putting their own innovations in, and hopefully then trading those ideas back. So, but it is entirely due to leadership. If we fragment the business and let every business fight for its own corner, it won't work. So you come back to how we were really successful, and Collins was persuading Navy and the DMO and ASC to work together. That's going to be the same for a new submarine build as it is for a new warship build, and certainly the experience in air warfare destroyers. Don't stand apart, work together.
You really have to extend and maintain the hothouse.
Yeah.
Just finally, to end on a more speculative note, if we were to acquire a Japanese design for the future submarine, and if we were to adopt some of the Japanese capabilities with regard to continuous build, their continuous build program where they make small batches and they continue to improve on further small batches over time, are you confident in ASC's ability to adapt to this new cultural mindset?
Yeah, I think some work has to be done, though. If you're going to build to somebody else's design, you really need to understand the design, and you need to understand the processes that are intended in that design for the submarine to be effectively built. So I think a very effective partnership needs to be formed almost on day one when that choice is made, and that choice I think is likely to be made after the competitive evaluation process. And when that choice is made, whoever that's with, start on day one, and if some work's going to be done in Australia, start to work with the designer to make sure that it can be built, make sure it can be maintained, understand the skills, even probably get to a deep understanding of the educational processes in the country of choice, so that we can be sure here that our educational processes will suffice to do the job that's necessary. It's not always the case that they will. So there's a heck of a lot of work to go on to make sure that we can take that submarine, have a sovereign capability to maintain it, even if we don't build it. I mean, my preference would be to have a level of build here in those early days, and progressively over a 12 submarine program, if it is a 12 submarine program, probably take the whole build from, 6 or 8 outwards and build those, and then continuously build submarines thereafter.
Yep.
Which gives the learning curve that's necessary to drive, to the best levels of productivity that you can. This boom and bust approach is very bad for productivity.
Well, we're unfortunately out of time. Stephen, thank you very much for coming in and joining us this evening. Well, that's a wrap for this week. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to your company again next week. Our thanks to our special guest, Mr. Steve Ludlam, former head of the Australian Submarine Corporation, our producer, Alicia Moraw, and to David Olney. For now, goodbye from the Strategikon team.